The thing about meaning is that we can convey it to others. We say something to another human being and they will understand what we mean, at least if all goes well. Now, one of the cool things about language is that it has ways to make sure that all goes well. It has means to ensure that meaning does not get lost in interaction. Little words like huh and yeah. And these words have a special kind of meaning too, but it's a kind of meaning that isn't conveyed to others. It's the kind of meaning that helps us convey our thoughts. So let's see. Take, for example, the thought that this guy has: the pig has wings. It's a funny thought, which, at least in our world, doesn't correspond to a fact, but it's still a thought. Now he can convey this thought by uttering a sentence. The pig has wings. And when he says this sentence to his friend, the friend might think that he's a bit crazy, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't understand his friend. He can perfectly replicate the thought in his own mind, no matter how crazy. Meaning is not about representing the world, but it's about knowing what the world would have to look like were the sentence to represent a fact in the world. To know the meaning of a sentence is to know its truth conditions. So, when you hear a sentence expressing someone's thought, you can ponder it and decide for yourself if you believe it or not, whether you think it's true or not. When we anchor a thought to our world, we can tell whether it's true or false, at least if we encounter the relevant evidence. So, just suppose, that upon pondering this thought for a while, the guy encounters the pig with the wings right here in his own little world in Barcelona. So it turns out that the sentence is, in fact, true. The pig has wings and it can fly. So obviously, he's got to tell his friend that he can now believe what his friend said. Wait a minute. How do they know which pig they're actually talking about? Remember when the guy told his friend that the pig has wings? He was saying the pig, as if both of them already knew about this pig. Well, you might have guessed it. This was not actually the beginning of their conversation. Prior to this, about 2 minutes earlier, they started this conversation. The guy in the armchair asked him about the pig he got. They obviously both knew about this pig before they had this conversation. It was anchored into their common ground. But it was there without wings. Anyways, because they both knew about this pig, they could use the definite article, the pig, to refer to this pig in their common ground. And now they've updated their common ground so that the pig has wings in their common ground. So, some aspects of language are dedicated to our thoughts. But there are also some aspects of language that are dedicated to managing our shared thoughts. They indicate whether or not something is in our common ground, like the. It indicates that the pig is already in the common ground. If he would use a pig, then he would have indicated that the pig is not yet in the common ground. He still has to introduce it. And when he does, the pig will in fact be in their common ground. Now, The common ground does not only contain individuals, like flying pigs, it also contains propositions, full thoughts, like this one, namely that the pig is flying through the Arc de Triomphe in Barcelona. And like with reference, a speaker can indicate whether the thought is old or new for them. So suppose the guy hears for the first time about his friend's flying pig. It's going to be a surprise, and he can indicate this by exclaiming, "Your pig has wings?" And he would use a very distinctive intonation with that exclamation. He would indicate not only that this is news, but that it was really unexpected. Or he could simply respond with, "Oh," which still indicates that it's news to him, but maybe he's less surprised. Now, if this is something he already knew, he would respond differently. For example, he could simply say, "Yeah, isn't it great?" And remember what he said at the beginning of this video? Okay. It kind of indicated that he did not believe what he was told. He didn't update his common ground, though he was acknowledging that his friend told him about his pig with wings. So now we know that language allows for a particular form of thinking, however trivial or profound these thoughts might be. But also, language allows for a particular way of communicating these thoughts. And this allows us to build a common ground, to synchronize our minds, as it were. It really is a way of mind reading, so that anyone can have the experience of a profound thought and be blown away by it. Now, one of the cool things about language is that we can express this too. We can express that we are blown away by other people's thoughts. Like our guy with the cocktail, he goes, "Wow." Language has words that are dedicated to indicating how a particular thought fits into our system of thoughts, how it fits into our own personal ground. And not only that, language also has means to regulate the interaction itself. Take these guys again. If Hamlet were to actually talk to someone and not just to himself, he might add a little word at the end of his utterance to indicate that he wants a response. Well, he really wants confirmation for his profound insight into the human condition, and A does just that. Now, when you explicitly ask for a response, you better stop talking and give your addressee a turn. And that's what the cocktail guy does. He takes his turn. But since he's not really sure what to say, he starts his turn with, and that merely indicates that he's taking the turn and gives him time to come up with a reaction. He doesn't seem to be too enthusiastic about updating his common ground to include this particular question, though. Yikes. Let's try again. Here's another one of these little words that mark a response. He could use "well," and that would indicate that he knows he's expected to agree, but he's not really in agreement. But he doesn't want to be confrontational. So the least he can do is to be explicitly cooperative in that he takes up his turn as requested. So you see, one of the defining properties of linguistic interaction is that people take turns. And this happens in a very orderly fashion. Typically, There's not too much overlap in their turns, and the gaps between the turns aren't too long either. It's quite a remarkable skill if you think about it. And sometimes the content of a turn is not making it clear that a response might be required. After all, mostly the content of a turn is a thought. But language has these explicit means to indicate that a turn is required, or that a turn is taken in response. So one person initiates a conversation by saying something and requesting a response, and the other person can mark their response as such, especially if they need some time to figure out what they're thinking about this particular issue they have to respond to. So language allows us to respond immediately without having to actually know what we will respond. These little words that don't seem to have much meaning have an important function in interaction. They allow for smooth turn taking. There are those that initiate and those that react, which tells you something about the logic of language in interaction. Most conversations can be broken down into adjacent initiation and reaction moves. Some of these adjacency pairs are very scripted. When someone greets you, you greet them back. When someone pays you a compliment, you say thanks. And when you get a question, you answer. And clearly, this aspect of language is very sensitive to who is talking to whom. So perhaps these guys would express themselves a little differently. And definitely not like this. Now, given that the language of turn taking is taking care of organizing our conversations, it comes as no surprise that it would be sensitive to the identity of the people talking to each other. Just like the language of grounding is sensitive to who knows what in the ongoing conversation. And all of that is needed to convey our thoughts to others.